Okay, so welcome everyone to this second Northwest Coast ARC Implementation Science subgroup. So this is our second seminar where we're really trying to get people together who've got an interest in implementation science in all its guises and all across all sort of disciplines, really, to try and learn from each other and try and get a group of people to see the different ways that people are using implementation science across health, education, etc. And it's really quite broad and by definition encompasses a lot of methodologies. So it's great that we've got this second session today. It is being recorded and will be available for those who are unable to come. So I'm hoping that's fine and you consent to that by coming on. If you have got any queries, I presume you talk to you, Debbie, for Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So as I mentioned, unfortunately, Emma is unable to join us this morning because she has COVID and isn't very well. So we will talk about at the end and think about our next session and whether we can, we'll get Emma to do that at a separate time, potentially with another talk as well. But we have got the fabulous Claire. She's going to talk to us this morning about the role of co-production and in the development of implementation of the James Place model, which I don't know what that is. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. I've told Claire she can have a little bit longer. So she's going to do her best to talk nice and slowly. And over to you, Claire, if you want to share your screen.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen and then I'll get started. Right, does everyone see that okay? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. So my name's Claire Hanlon and I'm a PhD student at Liverpool John Moores University. The overall aim of my PhD is to look at the feasibility and efficacy of the James's Place model. But today I'll be talking about the role of co-production in the development and implementation of the James's Place service and model. Well, first, a bit of background. Suicide is a major public health risk, particularly for men. And the reasons for this are quite complex and diverse. And this emphasises the need for suicide prevention strategies that are not only acceptable, accessible and effective, but those that can be tailored to meet individual needs and priorities. And James's Place does this by implementing the core principles of co-production, and this enables therapists to work alongside the individuals to adapt the James's Place model to suit and be responsive to their needs. James's Place is a community-based centre offering suicide prevention support. It delivers a clinical intervention which is delivered by qualified therapists trained in the James's Place model. There's two centres, one in Liverpool and another centre in London. There are plans to open further centres around the UK in the near future. And James's Place is able to offer support to individuals who identify as male, those who are aged 18 or older, registered with a GP and willing to share information with a GP, and those who are able to access the accommodation and engage in talk therapy. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about co-production and how James's Place has implemented co-production. So for anyone who may not know, co-production involves stakeholders working together in a mutually equitable relationship to plan, design and develop services. Stakeholders can be commissioners, academics, researchers and people with lived experience. And in working in partnership, each stakeholder is recognised as an asset who brings value through their expertise. So everyone's got an equal footing at the table as such. And James's Place has really embedded co-production into their internal culture, and they've implemented the values of co-production as shown there, such as a culture of openness and honesty, and a culture in which people are valued and respected in every aspect of their service delivery. James's Place has done this by embedding or following the steps of co-production highlighted here. So just to look at step 4 there, which is identify areas of work where co-production can have a genuine impact and involve citizens in the earlier stages of project design. So in setting up the service, James's Place was really keen to gain feedback from multiple stakeholders from different agencies, including people with lived experience and men. And they invited people along to consult on the design of the building in a focus group. And James's Place acted and implemented the feedback provided by men and people with lived experience among other stakeholders, and invited people to view the service once it was complete. And it was fed back through interviews that the men and people with lived experience felt that their ideas had been listened to and implemented, and people with lived experience fed back that they felt that they wished they'd had the opportunity to access a service such as James's Place when they'd experienced suicidal crisis. And just there, looking at step 7, which is regularly review and report back on progress, aim to move from you said we did to we said we did. James's Place has embedded evaluation systems into the way that they work, and this involves men who access the service and also the therapists who deliver the James's Place model. They conduct a yearly evaluation report, and this allows the service not only to review progress, but also to reflect on practice and service delivery and identify areas that may need to be changed or improved, for example. So as an example, James's Place we're able to rapidly change actually the delivery of the model from face-to-face delivery to remote delivery in response to the COVID pandemic. So incorporating a co-productive approach has a number of advantages, including the development of services that are more effective, services that have more reach because they're contextually specific to the targeted population, the development of services that improve quality of care and deliver individualised care because they consider the needs and priorities of individuals. And also it helps, incorporating co-production helps to bridge that translational gap from research evidence to real world application. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the James's Place model that's delivered. This is a clinical model, as I said before, so it draws on 3 established theories of suicide, namely the interpersonal theory of suicide, the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality, and the integrated motivational volitional theory of suicide. All a little bit of a mouthful, but basically all you need to be aware of and know is that each of these models emphasise working alongside the individual to co-produce suicide prevention and also safety planning. James's Place, just to note, has established partnerships across the city, both cities actually, London and Liverpool, with multiple partnerships, so multiple sites, so men can refer in from different sites including A&E, GP practices, mental health services, and men can self-refer in as well. And when they are referred in, they see a qualified therapist who's been trained to deliver the model. So this diagram here, this just kind of highlights the typical delivery, if you like, the planned delivery of the James's Place model and the trajectory that men would go through on their clinical and therapeutic journey. So the model itself, it consists of 9 sessions delivered in 3 lots of 3. And the first 3 sessions are delivered within 7 days of men accessing the service. And there's a focus on managing risk, safety planning, and ensuring that the men are engaged in therapy. And I should just say, just to touch very briefly, you'll see there that I've written cards, and that relates to the a core component of the model, which is the lay your cards on the table intervention. I've got them here, so just going to show you. They consist of 4 sets of cards, and they kind of aesthetically look like playing cards. And they have words written on them that relate to thoughts, feelings and behaviours of suicide. And they're delivered at different points, as you can see, during the therapeutic journey. The earlier cards sort of focus on identifying what's driving the suicidal crisis, whereas the later cards, which is these, how can I get through this? They've got a focus on coping, and there's kind of 2 sets of cards incorporated within that 1 set, which looks at what the man can do, so what I can do, and then what others can do, so what the individual's supporters may do to help them should they experience crisis again or feel that their mental health's deteriorating. So going on from sessions from the first 3 sessions onto the next 3 sessions. These are person-centred. There's a focus on delivering brief psychological interventions, and these are delivered over the next 10 days. So that's, that might be delivering sleep hygiene strategies, SMART goals, CBT-based sort of approaches, that type of thing. And then the final 3 sessions, they focus on relapse prevention and safety planning. So the therapist will reflect and work with the individual to reflect on progress that's been made, looking at what has and hasn't helped maybe, and also looking to see the skills and strategies that the man's gained through their therapeutic journey. And the idea of that is to equip the men to be able to identify when their mental health may be deteriorating, and so they've got those strategies to hand to deploy. So it's kind of empowering individuals to become their own therapist. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some findings from a process evaluation that was conducted on James's Place just 6 months after the service opened. The purpose of this was to look at the role of co-production in the design, setup and delivery of the service. It was a qualitative-based study involving 11 semi-structured interviews with stakeholders, and all findings were thematically analysed. So the theme collaborative work, and that was developed, and this really emphasised how stakeholders noted how more effective it was to work as in a multi-agency environment rather than as isolated organisations, so better to work in partnership than in silo. And it reflected how co-production and this partnership of working was reflected in all different aspects of the design of the service. So locating the building, setting up the therapeutic model, delivering the service, and also through engagement, through research activities and also public events. And 4 sub-themes there were developed: service design and implementation, building location design, James's Place staff, and referrers into James's Place staff. And I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So the first sub-theme really highlights the importance of collaborative working towards a shared goal and transparency within this process. So James's Place was really keen to understand what was and wasn't working within a co-productive process. They'd worked from inception with multi-agency stakeholders, and they were really keen to learn the lessons from that, but also they were receptive to the ideas that stakeholders had and implementing them. And that quote there just really highlights the importance of involving people with lived experience, in that it provided valuable insight into what may or may not work for the men accessing the service in terms of service delivery. The next sub-theme is building design and implementation. Again, it relates quite closely to that previous sub-theme. Co-production was evident in the building design and location, and multiple stakeholders, including councillors and commissioners, were involved in ascertaining the building, particularly here in Liverpool, for James's Place. And these quotes here highlight the importance of including people with lived experience in that. So, for example, the project manager there, they had experienced or just recently been involved in a documentary looking at community-based suicide prevention services and what may or may not work best for people experiencing suicidal crisis. And the person there, that man had attempted to die by suicide and had experienced or been through the more traditional route of treatment, and they were involved and informed the building design in terms of what would make the building acceptable and accessible, but also sort of the design of the interior to make men feel most comfortable to engage in talk therapy. The third sub-theme is James's Place staff. So again, in keeping with the ethos of co-production, James's Place really wants to get feedback from staff in terms of what was and wasn't working in the service delivery. The staff really reflected positively on the environment, as highlighted by that quote there under the heading "The Environment." However, some areas of improvement were identified. So it was identified there wasn't a communal area where staff could go for a cup of tea or just to catch up together, or for those more important aspects such as peer support. However, staff felt reflected positively on the James's Place model. An aspect of the James's Place model is that the men can bring supporters along within the sessions, and it was identified by staff that this could be really useful and really helpful, particularly when men were a little bit stuck for words and were finding it quite difficult to articulate what was going on. And the final sub-theme, excuse me, is referrers into James's Place. So again, the James's Place wants to gain feedback from external partners. Partners felt that James's Place is a really good thing for men experiencing suicidal crisis. However, they felt that through the process of co-production, the referral processes could be enhanced. So, for example, James's Place could provide information to referrers, so they've got that to hand out either to men and also for them also, so they can, you know, keep up to date with the inclusion criteria when referring men. And also they acknowledged the importance of continued communication. So it was recognised that within external partners and referrers there may be a high turnover of staff, and it was important that James's Place keep a presence and keep people aware of the service and any changes that may be going on. So I'm going to very briefly talk about a fidelity study which I've conducted as part of my PhD, and that's looking at the James's Place model. So looking at how the model's delivered by therapists compared to the planned and delivery of the model. I must admit this is a work in progress, so please bear with me. It's a mixed method study involving semi-structured interviews with 8 therapists who've been trained to deliver the James's Place model. I did review also some audit documents from James's Place looking at 30 completed cases, and I'm not really going to go into the details of them, mainly because, not for any secretive reasons, mainly because I was literally comparing the plan of the delivery of the James's Place model, which I highlighted earlier in that diagram, and what was actually delivered in practice. And there was a moderate level of adherence highlighted through that audit process. And the reasons for that I'll discuss more around the qualitative findings. So the first theme is, or was, therapeutic environment, the third therapist. So again, the therapists really acknowledge the the therapeutic setting that James's Place has created and the role that they play in engendering and cultivating this. So it was acknowledged by therapists that the therapeutic environment being informal and a safe space for men really allows men to be heard and seen when discussing their suicidal crisis. And this contrasts quite starkly with more traditional medicalised routes of treatment. As I said, it wasn't lost on the therapists the role that they play in this, in developing that rapport and developing that therapeutic alliance. So there's the model there, yes, but it doesn't work in silo. The therapists implement this. The second theme is specialised suicide prevention training in James's Place model. Training was acknowledged by the therapists as being really important for their understanding and expertise in suicide prevention. So as that quote highlights by Therapist 8, they feel that this is essential. It'd be silly to undertake a role such as being a James's Place therapist without it, because it provides a strong framework for the therapist to work within. You know, James's Place is doing something really ambitious. You know, they're saving lives and they're trying to stop people from dying by suicide, and that's a really ambitious sort of approach that James's Place has, and that's what Therapist 8 discusses there. However, it wasn't lost again that therapists, the training, yeah, is important, but I call it the suck it and see moment. You can have lots of training, but until you actually do it, you kind of, you have the knowledge, but you haven't had the opportunity to do it. And it was acknowledged that it was important that therapists had peer support during that moment or during certain moments, just to sort of get the nod that, yeah, you're doing it right. And, you know, it sort of gives them the confidence that they're going in the right direction with it. The third theme, face-to-face rapid access to brief psychological therapy. This relates to the acceptability of the James's Place model. So when men come into the service, access the service, or refer to the service, sorry, they're seen within 24 hours, which is really rapid and contrasts actually with more traditional medical routes. And James's Place therapists felt that this promotes acceptability of the model, but also could be a significant mechanism of change also, as highlighted by that therapist, the therapist 2 under rapid access. So it allows the men to be seen when they're experiencing suicidal crisis rather than 18 months down the line. And this really allows the therapists to address the crux of the issues driving the suicidal crisis and help the men, support the men through that. However, it wasn't lost on the therapist the importance of the men's readiness to engage in therapy. So therapy is demanding, and it was recognised that there's only so much the therapist can do within that hour, and they're relying on the men to go away and reinforce the strategies that they've learned, put them into practice. The fourth theme is person-centred care. This relates around the timeliness of the layer cards on the table intervention, which I showed a little bit earlier. So again, the cards have words written on there that relate to thoughts, feelings and behaviours around suicide. And it was felt these cards really help the men articulate, oh bless you, articulate what's going on for them, that's brought them into the centre. And it allows the therapist to really adapt the intervention to suit and be responsive to their men's needs. And this represents a shift away from a one-size-fits-all approach and allows for a tailoring of the intervention to suit men's needs. And the final theme is flexibility in delivery of the James's Place model. So therapists felt that it's necessary that there's flexibility within the adaptation of the James's Place model. So yeah, the structure's there, but the therapists felt that they, or perceived that they should have the autonomous sort of decision making within their practice to be able to maybe change up the delivery of the core components of the model where suited or where needed to suit individual needs. So it may be, rather than delivering that first set of cards which focuses around what's brought the men into the service, it could be that the last set of cards may be delivered because they're very focused around coping, and that would be suitable to do for somebody who comes in with real high risk of suicide, and would help, you know, equip the men with some coping strategies to keep them safe. And then the therapist could work through the other cards throughout the the therapeutic journey. And also this flexibility within the model allows the therapist to use their clinical judgments to introduce additional therapeutic processes or approaches where needed, like psychoeducation, to address what's going on for the men. So again, the flexibility allows that tailoring of the model and shifts away from this universal approach to implementing interventions. So that's all me, all I wanted to talk about today. Just to conclude, the findings support the application of the core principles of co-production in the design, setup and implementation of community-based suicide prevention services as demonstrated by James's Place and the acceptability of the model. Co-production does facilitate tailoring of the model, and applying co-production in this way is not without its limitations, but these can be overcome by working in partnership. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Claire. That was really interesting to hear about that. Yeah, great. If anyone's got any questions, put their hands up. And while people are mulling that over, then maybe I'll take chair's prerogative and start, if that's all right, Claire.
Yeah, sure.
I guess I'm still trying to get my head around how James's Place is funded in terms of sustainability, and also like whether it's an approach that should be upscaled or in any others, because it's, you know, it sounds like it's a good thing.
Yeah. I'm biased, but I'd say so.
Yeah, so but it's in London and Liverpool, and obviously that's quite a small number of centres. So in the co-production element, you didn't mention too much about the different stakeholders involved. I'm just interested in commissioners, as I think they're and managers and the people who have the money and the power to influence these things. So I just wondered if you had any insights into that.
Unfortunately, I don't have a great deal of insight. I kind of came on board once James's Place was set up and established. I do know that I describe it as, my choice of words are going to be awful, but it was almost like the perfect storm of different people came together at the same time. So there was my supervisor, Pooja Saini, some people may know, and she's a researcher in suicide prevention. There was Jane Boland, who's the clinical lead at James's Place, and she'd worked at Mersey Care, I think, for 30 years. So there was that knowledge base, and then there was all different people, and people sort of come together. So James's Place came about really, I suppose, through some parents sadly lost their son to suicide, James, and they set up a foundation. And at that point, before the centre was set up, they were funding different research projects and different sorts of initiatives around suicide prevention. But then they took it a step further to create James's Place as a centre. So I'd really, anyone interested in the background, maybe have a look at the James's Place website, and there's some evaluation reports on there that give a little bit more detail. It is a charity, so they do rely on raising funds from the public, but I believe they may get some funding as well through the NHS, but I don't know any of the details, I'm afraid, around that. But I'm sure if you got in touch with Jane Boland at James's Place, I can pass on details with her permission. I'm sure she'd go into details around that.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks. I'm sure there's lots, it sounds like it's been a long process to get to where they are. So I'm sure there'll be lots of information out there. I can see 2 hands raised, so I'm going to go to Alexander and then Robert, if that's okay. Alexander?
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a PhD student at Liverpool University, and I'm also kind of doing an implementation-based or focused PhD looking at digital interventions in primary care and health equality, so interviewing lots of people and such too. So I'm quite interested in how you developed your methodology. How did you come up with the themes that you were using? Was that only from the thematic analysis, or did you have preconceived themes that you built upon and then developed along? And how did you recruit? How did you choose who to interview? Was that also based on the initial themes, or did you like reiteratively?
So is that for the fidelity study? Sorry, Alexander. Yeah. So I'll be perfectly honest, COVID hit at the start of my PhD, so the planned studies didn't quite go to plan. So things did have to change. I think I was always going to do something around fidelity and looking at the implementation of the James Place model. But that I think the original, it's fair to say the original plan of the PhD was kind of thrown out the window. And
yeah, I mean, I threw mine out the window a month ago too, actually, but yeah.
Oh, you've got my sympathy.
Yeah.
Well, I decided to look at implementation or the fidelity of the delivery. I think it's really important, as psychologists, we want to understand the mechanisms of change. What is it about the model that makes it work? And, it's very early work. It's very tentative early work in that respect. But I was keen to gain the perspective of the therapist, because they're the ones using it. They're the ones implementing it. And, at the end of the day, we need to understand whether, what it is that goes on during those sessions. And, the model is implemented, that's been revealed through the audit, and it is adhered to. So my decision making around the thematic analysis was just to gain an understanding of, the types of themes, if you like, and the processes involved, and just thinking about how is it used, what is it that the therapists do. I was aware that additional therapeutic strategies may be used, and maybe understanding the processes behind that as an example. I interviewed as many of the therapists that I possibly could. So like Louise said, there's only 2 centres at the moment. It's not it is aiming to be nationwide. However, it's not like IAPT or something like that, where there's a massive pool of therapists. So it is a small sample size, I acknowledge that. I just interviewed as many as I possibly could, really. Sorry, I hope that answers your question.
No, I think that's a good answer. Can I also ask, maybe you mentioned it, but since you are part of the ARC, I guess, did you use public advisors? Because I'm interviewing lots of service users and such, but then you have this impetus of using public advisors as part of the ARC, and I'm kind of struggling a bit to figure out how to actually use them because I'm already interviewing users.
Yeah, so the original plan again was to have a PPI group. We are in the process of trying to set up a PPI group at James's Place. It did have to go on hold during COVID. So when COVID hit, the service really did rapidly change their delivery model. It is a face-to-face model. That's quite important, and I think they want to keep that, you know, quite passionately. They're quite passionate about that. But literally within 48 hours, they changed it from face-to-face delivery to remote delivery because everyone was so passionate that the service really needed to continue despite COVID hitting in a safe way. So all their energy, I've got to be honest, went on that. And, you know, obviously we've had COVID for a number of years now, and they've had to change and adapt and shift as that process has gone along and the guidance has changed. So there is plans to set up a PPI group. We haven't got there. So unfortunately, I've not had the opportunity to have a PPI group consult on my PhD. However, I am part of the steering group at James's Place, and there are people with lived experience there, as well as you know, GP, for example. There's other researchers and people from James's Place as well. So I've had the opportunity to gain their feedback on things that I've done and the studies that I've designed. So maybe not the best, but second best.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Robert?
Hi, Claire. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Dr. Robert MacDonald. I'm a service user with Merseycare, and I've done a lot of work on co-production and related issues to do with my lived experience. I was quite interested to see that at the top of the list that you gave of the development of the project, there were things to do with the location and the design of the of James's Place. I'm actually an architect, and I'm very interested in the design. So I also teach a class in the Bootle Life Rooms to do with art and well-being. I'm just wondering about at the very early stages, you know, how was the location of James's Place developed from a point of view of co-production and from the point of view of design? I don't know if you're aware of the Maggie's projects to do with cancer care. And of course, cancer is another crisis that people need somewhere to turn to and to talk, you know, through their issues. And the Maggie's projects, there's many of them now. They're all on different hospital sites, and they've all been designed by different designers and in co-production, and they offer an amazing service to people who are coping with cancer. And I see there are parallels between people coping with cancer and suicide, and where it might or might not lead you. So my question is really, what is the role of therapeutic design in James's Place, and how has that been developed from the point of view of co-production?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh no, that's a great question. Actually, as one of the headings in my the themes in my study, the facility study, the therapist, the environment, the third therapist, that actually comes from the therapists themselves. So it's not lost on them the importance of that setting. So my understanding, because unfortunately I wasn't part of the process of setting up James's Place, but my supervisor was, and from the conversations that I've heard, different people were involved, as I said, commissioners, councillors, and it was about securing a building in Liverpool. They wanted it to be accessible, so city centre based in the first instance, just because it was felt that everyone could reach it from the north of the Liverpool to the south of the Liverpool. So I think that's how the decision around the location of the building came across. Originally they did have a interior designer, or they did have an interior designer on board, and I believe that the original sort of decor was around kind of a bit Laura Ashley, shall we say. I think that was going to be the original plan, and then through the process of co-production, the men and people with lived experience were just like, no, this isn't really going to work. We want something that makes people feel comfortable, at ease, kind of like being in someone's living room type thing. So that's where it changed it from like this flowery aesthetic towards a more neutrally toned sort of interior design. And when you go into James's place, it is literally, it's a house, so it's a house in the Georgian Quarter. So you go into the house and you have the reception team there. Jolie, she comes out and she signs, she's get you in and whatnot, and she'll say, do you want a broom? And she'll take you into the waiting room, which looks like a living room. It's absolutely beautiful. It's got double doors going into the garden area, and I think that just really puts people at ease, because anyone who goes through a medical appointment of any sort, you're naturally a bit on edge anyway. But then if you sat in a clinical environment, I know I find myself shifting around and feeling a bit uncomfortable like that. So I think that's how the process or the decisions around the interior design came around, really through that consultative focus groups that occurred with people with lived experience, men, as well as other stakeholders, in terms of what is it about the aesthetic and the environment and the way that it looks, what is it that would make people feel comfortable enough to engage in therapy.
Do you know the life rooms?
I've heard of the life rooms, yeah.
I think you should visit them.
Oh yeah.
And there's 5 of them. There's one in Walton, one in Southport, one in Bootle, and people drop in there for lots of different reasons. And I think you don't necessarily drop in because you've got certain thoughts. You drop in for other reasons. And then the other point of contact, the Samaritans, you make a telephone call, and your first point of contact, is down the telephone. Yeah. And I think that's a very important stage where the talking starts. So, and I know during COVID, Merseycare had telephone connections with people living in the community, and some of their volunteers would phone up on a regular basis to find out how people were feeling and how they were getting on. And so that kind of carried over, during COVID. So the telephone is still quite important. Yeah. If you've got a friend or a member of the family that you can phone on the telephone, that's very, very important. So there are a number of possibilities. I don't know if James Place is exploring those, but certainly I would encourage you personally to go to visit some of the life rooms. Oh, yeah. And they're all converted buildings apart from one, and it's a new building, the one in Bootle.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the one I've not been to the one in Liverpool, but I went to school in Walton. I live in Walton, so I'm very familiar with the one, because it's the old library. It's a lovely building. It's an amazing building.
That's right. Yeah. The Maggie centres, you have a look at those, because maybe your PhD could have some element of compare and contrast different kind of buildings with quite similar ambitions. The Maggie Centres are fantastic projects, and they were all funded on the basis of a person called Maggie who had cancer, and in the last 5 years of her life, she set up a trust fund to develop these projects around the country. There's a large number of them. Everyone is different. Everyone is in a different location. I think there's one in Clatterbridge. There's certainly one in Manchester, and the first ones are in Scotland.
Oh, brilliant.
Thanks, Robert. I think that's really valuable to think about, because they're, you know, across disciplines and in other areas we can often learn a lot. But I'm just conscious of time, so I'm wondering if we can just move things on to think about fidelity in general. I've seen Victoria's had to go, but I'm wondering, we need to think about what next. And a few things come up to me in general, and I could ask you loads more. I feel like I'd end up being like in a virus situation with Claire, where I'm thinking about fidelity, and did you think about any frameworks for fidelity and using those? And also you mentioned mixed methods, but I'm not really sure how you're integrating mixed methods, because you've kind of presented results as your qualitative element. So there's all these questions going around my mind. But I guess in general, has everybody else on the call got any experience around fidelity, and would that be a topic we should maybe pick up at another one of these seminars? Because the other thing I'm thinking about is who has received, who goes to James's place and who doesn't, because that's often a challenge.
It
you
is,
know, we speak to the people who come, but we can't, it's harder to find the people who don't come.
And James's place has really had that. So the clinical, well, everyone, all the therapists are very passionate, and like I said earlier, it's really ambitious what they aim to do, and it's always been at the forefront of the mind. Yeah, we're getting these people in, but who are we not getting in? And they've just recently employed an outreach officer, so they are doing a lot of work around, you know, getting those people in that they feel that may need the service most. So there is monitoring systems in there, and that's always been part of the evaluation, looking at the demographics, if you like, of who's coming into the service. But yeah, no, sorry, that's a really important point.
Yeah, it's just, I'm sure there's parallels in other areas. So we've got like some fidelity, we've got the interaction between the context and the intervention itself, which the environment clearly plays a huge role in. And then also around co-production and how broad that is in terms of the different stakeholders. So obviously Emma's not been able to speak today, so it would be good to get her to do her talk, which was due to be on Beyond What Works, looking at implementation variability as a moderator of outcomes. So I think that's another sort of, almost has some parallels with this in terms of fidelity and where things are implemented differently, i.e. there's poor fidelity, you might call it, or equally maybe it's adaptable and therefore a good thing, and how that interacts. So perhaps we can pick that up on another seminar. Does that sound like a good idea to people? I'm conscious there's lots of people who are sort of there and lurking in the background, but maybe type in the chat if you feel happier to do that, rather than, yeah, we've got a thumbs up. Good, because you know, these sessions want to be useful and interactive. And I think that's the beauty, is that in different areas we've got similar challenges. So having opportunity to see how other people are dealing with those, I think, is a good thing. Okay, so in terms of when we might do that, then I'm assuming we're looking at September, October. Nobody wants it in August, do they? Does that sound like a plan? And does anybody have any particular work around fidelity they'd like to present or come and talk about? Any of those issues? No one's volunteering. No. Well, have a think, and if there's you or any colleagues who were in that, I think it'd be nice to get a breadth of the same topic but in different areas, and then we can look at how different people. So as I said, Emma was going to talk about implementation variability, which clearly has parallels with fidelity. Have a think if there's anything else that, and it doesn't have to be fully developed, so you can use it as a sort of sounding board, if you like. I'm looking at you there, Alexander, who's not putting the hand up, but perhaps.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it. I'm not in the implementation science group, and I don't really use the fidelity term as such. Yeah. But I think my project does quite strongly relate to the concept of fidelity. So yeah, I could probably talk about it for. Have
a think. I'm not going to put you on the spot, and anybody else as well. But but let's have that as a suggestion. Probably September, October time, we'll have another seminar with a focus around, as you say, different people use different language for the same sort of things, but around implementation variability or fidelity, or what is actually delivered and how you might evaluate that or incorporate that into an evaluation.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have a short presentation on my project. So feel free to put me up for it.
Okay, great. Sold. Great. Well, thanks for everyone today. Has anybody got any final comments before I'm going to wrap up 10 minutes early? No. Well, thank you for today. If anyone has got any suggestions, feel free to email us. Thanks again, Claire, for carrying on in adversity with just being a solo act. But you did it very well and generated some great discussion. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll get another seminar in the autumn.